what we're going to do is delve deeper into PHP. We should, by this point, understand the basics of PHP. That PHP pages are really sort of souped up HTML pages. They're HTML pages plus something else. And that something else is PHP script, which are designated by the indicators in the file that we're not in HTML land, we're in PHP land. So we have the basics down, and we saw last week how you can integrate your PHP code with, not last week, but the last week we had classes, with your HTML, and also how we can get data from the form that was submitted to do something, if you remember that. So what we're going to do this week is delve deeper into that and start writing better PHP code. And what do I mean by better? You know, sometimes students will ask me, like, you know, they'll do something a certain way, and I'll tell them, you know, well, you know, it would be better if you did it this way. And sometimes students get a little confused about, like, why one way is better than another way. Well, some of the time, there are different ways to do things, and I can't say one is better than the other. All right? Sometimes. Sometimes, though, it's pretty clear when one solution is better than another solution, and that is by following the acronym DRY, which stands for Do Not Repeat Yourself. A solution that has little duplicate code is better than a solution that has a lot of duplicate code. All right? That's objectively true. And why is that objectively true? Well, because first of all, if you have to make a change to code, and if you have duplicated code throughout your application, you'll have to make the change in several places. The second part of that is if you have duplicated code, you're more likely to make a mistake when you duplicate the code. You may think all you need to do is cut and paste the code, and maybe you do, but maybe in some cases, in addition to cut and paste, you have to make some other small alteration. And it's possible to screw things up and have things done inconsistently if you have duplicated code. So because of that, our aim is going to be to write our PHP code without repeating ourselves. And how we're going to do that? There's two big things that we're going to do. We're going to have include files, and we're going to have functions. These are the two most straightforward ways that we can reduce duplicated code in our applications. And we'll cover them with this example that I'm going to go over today, and we'll continue on it probably next week if we don't get through all of it today. All right. So let's look at the application. Well, let me illustrate a problem first of all. Here's the example I use in my 216 class, and many of you probably saw it. We had these prototypes, right? Where I have a page, and I only did a few of the pages, but I have the home page, I have Hawaii, and I have Iceland as destination for your vacation. Now, these pages look the same. However, since these were done strictly in HTML, they're the same because I've duplicated the code. So if I look at the home page, and if I were to look at the page for Iceland, they're the same because I have the exact same HTML in them. All right? That nav is the same as this nav because the HTML is the same. Well, Okay, that's not necessarily too hard to create because what you do is you create a template page and then you just clone it a bunch of times. But what happens if we have to make a change? What happens if we add the UK as a destination location? Well, I might come in here and say, okay, let's add the UK as a destination. Save it. There it is on this page. However, it's not on the Iceland page. Why? Because the code was duplicated. I have the same code in two places, which means that if I make a code change in one place, I have to make it everywhere. So I would not have to make it just in this one place. I have to make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 times. All right. Well, if you do anything 8 or 9 times, you're bound to mess it up, even though it's just copying and pasting. All right. It'd be much better to have all that stuff localized in a file. All right. And change that one file, and the change reflects everywhere on the application. We do that a little bit in this example by having our own CSS file. All right. So we have a single CSS file. And if I make the width of the header 800 pixels, that change takes place on every page. All right. Because we didn't repeat ourselves. That code was only in one place. So the bottom line is code in one place is better than having the same code duplicated. So again, through include files and functions, we're going to do that to a greater extent in PHP, and that's going to improve our code. We're going to do this by looking at this little website that I created, Planet Zellers. Fitness for IT people. All right. And we have 3 pages on the site. We have a home page. We have a heart rate chart. In other words, you know, if you are 50 years old, for exercise, your heart should be between 85 and 136 beats per minute, and the absolute maximum is 170. All right. So you've probably all seen these charts before. I also have a calculator. So this covers in increments of 5 years. If I wanted to see, let's see, I'm 22, and I had 20 beats in 6 seconds. No, I don't want 20 beats. That's too many. 12 beats in 6 seconds. That tells me that I'm in the optimal exercise heart range. Okay. So let's see how I accomplish this. Notice this also has consistency. Looks the same from page to page. All right. In addition, we can probably read between the lines and see this calculation of your maximum heartbeat and the ideal range. That calculation is done on more than one page. So let's look at the code that does this. We're going to start first by looking at include files. So let's look at the home page. Now, the home page is a plain old HTML file in that there's no PHP codes other than the include files. All right. Other than the include files. You could have a website that was a mix of HTML and PHP files. However, if I were doing a website and I had PHP available and I was going to do the rest of the site in PHP, I would make every page a PHP page just so I could take advantage of the include files. All right. What do include files say? Well, what they do is they say, take the contents of this file and effectively paste it right here in the HTML. So I have a file called header inc. And that has a header, which is an H1 that says Planet Zellers, P, fit, paragraph fit, fitness for IT people. I want to add something to this. I want to add a second paragraph to this. I make the change in one place, and then did I save it? Oh, thank you. Didn't notice that. There we go. Open since 2017. And not only is it changed on this page, it's changed on every page. So the navigation, the problem that we saw last time, there's a navigation, include file. Same thing. I want to add another link to a list of my locations. I can make the change in one place. And it's added to every page. So this is better than the format that I used in this example, in the previous example that we had, because I don't have to go and make the same change in several places. I've gotten rid of duplicate code. All right. So this is a better solution than the solution that we had for the prototypes that we covered in CISS232. So again, whenever you see include, think of literally taking the contents of that file. The web server does this and pastes it right where the include statement is. Paste it right where the include statement is. You can have multiple include files. What can you put in include files? You can put in include files anything that you would put in a PHP document. That is, you can put HTML code in an include file. You could put CSS code in an include file. You could put JavaScript code in an include file. You could put PHP code. Did I already say that one? PHP code and HTML in the include file. So any of those things, any code that could be on a web page, a PHP web page, you can put inside an include file. Now, that being said, it's still probably best, in my opinion, to put your CSS files in a CSS file instead of, I could have put that in an include file and then put that include file here. But usually it's better to put the CSS in a CSS file, the JavaScript in a .js file. But I could really have some weird situations where I did some sort of location detection via my PHP script and change the CSS based on the location that I was at. So if you're in the East Coast, or you could check the time zone. If I was in Eastern time, I could display the time for you in Eastern Standard Time. And if you were in Central Time, I could display it in Central Time. So you could actually integrate your PHP along with JavaScript, CSS, and other things. That's kind of advanced. I have done that a handful of times in my career, but that's probably responsible for at least some of my gray hairs, because that gets very, very, very confusing. All right. But you can do it. All right. That's why I make the claim that you can put anything in a CSS, in a include file that you can put on a PHP page. Now, in this particular case, what I've done is I've taken the main sections of the page and I put each of them in an include file. So if we look at this, the main sections of the page are the header, the navigation, and the footer. This section over here is different on each page. So there's no include file for that because you couldn't have an include file for that, right? The chart page looks different than the calculator page, and the home page looks different than all of them. All right. So you couldn't possibly have this content in an include file, but any duplicated file. Now, if we look at another website, if this were done in PHP, which it were not, but if it were done in PHP, if we looked at Amazon, for example, there could be an include file for this stuff, an include file for this, an include file for this even, an include file for these links at the bottom of the page, maybe a different include file for this. All right. What you do is you essentially take that wireframe that you've developed, and part of the design of your application would be to take the wireframe that you've developed and decide what pieces of it can go in an include file. In this case, maybe this could be an include file and this could be an include file. I don't know. It depends on the particular thing. But you would essentially take your wireframe and decide which sections of the page. Here's another good example. This would probably be an include file. This would be in its own include file. And probably a footer on the bottom of the page would be an include file. And you include that in all your pages. So in other words, writing a PHP page or a set of PHP pages is easy, all right? The first one takes a long time, relatively speaking. Once you have that, then, all you're doing is changing that middle piece. So the only difference between the index page and the chart page is the code that goes right here. Top of it is the same, pretty much the same. But the shell of it, the template for it, we use the footer include, we use the header and the nav include. Are there any questions about this? Yes.
So I see the file extension is done.
Yes. It could be. Yeah, it could be. What I do, why I make it .inc is to distinguish that this itself will not get served by the web server. And I don't want it to be served by the web server. In other words, if this was header.php, I could type in. In fact, let's do that just for laughs. I'm going to quickly rename this header.php. All right. If it's called header.php, I could do this and have the web server serve it up. Well, I don't really want the web server to serve up that because it's not a whole page. It's a piece of a page. If I instead call it .inc, then it doesn't realize that it is able to be, it's not able to be sent to the client as is. So I can't pull that down. And that would be, I don't know why that would be bad, but it just seems to me like that would be the way I would want it to happen. I would not want to serve up part of a web page. All right. So I would include I would call my include files INC so they would not be processed by the web server. Now, what makes this processed, why does this code get processed as PHP then? Because it's inside a PHP file. So that PHP file that gets pasted in. So that's the file that is the PHP file, and that gets processed through the PHP preprocessor. All right. Questions about this? You will love this. All right, as you will start to write bigger pages and so on. You really can take a modularized approach and can really piece together web pages very, very quickly. All right, so that's part one. Part two of our way of not repeating ourselves is by including functions in include files. And we wouldn't have to include functions in include files, but often it's a good idea because oftentimes we have things that want to be used on multiple pages. So again, if you sort of read between the lines here, this page and this page share the calculation. All right. If I had them if I had the calculation in two different places, there'd be a potential that these could give inconsistent results. All right. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, same idea. I'm going to have an include file. All right. This one, in addition to having the include for the header and the include for the nav and the include for the footer, has an include for the heart rate calculations. And the include file is called heart.inc. So let's bring that one up. All right, notice this is based on the formula, which you can look up. This is an approximation. Don't use this actually to do your fitness test, although it's pretty close to being accurate. You figure out your maximum, which is the 220 minus your age. The minimum of the exercise range is half that. The maximum of your exercise range is 0.8. That. I also then have a function that says, is the heart rate in range? So that will not be used to prepare the chart. That will be used with the form where we enter a person's age and their heart rate and the calculation is done. Let's look at these closely. And this is a key thing to understand. All right? Key thing to understand is that functions have, let's talk about what makes a good function. All right? What makes a good function? Number one, and this is not trivial, as a good name, as a name that's easily understandable and does what and describes what it's supposed to do. Another characteristic of a good function is it has a name that indicates the one thing that is done. which means that we probably will not have an and in the function name. So if I say something like, if I have a function called calculate minimum and maximum heart rate, it's not a good function name. Function should do one thing. So what if you need to calculate both the minimum and maximum? Well, you would have a function that calculated minimum, a function that calculated maximum. All right, but what if I have to display it as a range? Then you have a function that says determine range, and that will display both the minimum and maximum. So you should be able to summarize what the function does as one thing and no ands in the title. And the function should be limited to doing just one thing. This is a good computer science term. Function should be loosely coupled. What that basically means is self-contained. So this function should accept the only inputs it needs as arguments. All right. In other words, even though I could do it, I'm not going to say something like this. I could do it this way, for example. And this would pull the age from the query string or the form collection. Now, I might do that. I might pull it in there, but I don't want to write the function that way because that limits how it's used. All right. Gee, I hope I didn't screw it up. The function that calculates the range and whatever is used here. There is no form input. It just runs through the ages from 20 through 80. Here there is form input. So if I were to write this function to pull the age from the form, I would not be able to use that function on this page where there isn't a form. All right. What I can do is I can make the function as self-contained as possible. And I hope I didn't screw this up. I'm going to just hit undo a bunch of times. There we go. It accepts everything it needs as an argument. And then it returns the answer or the result as a return value. By the same token, I might want to display this on a page. So I could actually write this function without a return value and just say print max rate equals $max. Well, I don't want to return the maximum heart rate when I do the range calculation. Notice I'm nowhere on this page am I showing what the maximum heart rate is. I'm clearly using that maximum heart rate to determine this, but nowhere am I displaying it. Therefore, this function shouldn't be returning, or I'm sorry, should only return the maximum heart rate, should not be displaying on the page. So these functions, with rare exceptions, and you know, there's always an exception. So when I say always, remember that doesn't really mean always. All right. is going to be loosely coupled if there's nothing that ties this function to the specific page it's being used on. This function takes an age, calculates the maximum heart rate, and returns it. This function doesn't care where that age came from. It could come from a text box. It could come from a for loop. It could come from a radio button. It could come from a drop down. It could be read from a database. Doesn't care where that age comes from. That's the job of the page itself, to figure out where the age, what the age is that they want to use. All right. Likewise, we don't say what we're going to do with the answer. All right. We don't say what we're going to do with the answer. We're simply giving the answer. That makes this loosely coupled. It's not attached to the page at all, which means that if I change the page, I probably don't need to change this function at all. If I were to change the pages that use this function, I probably won't need to change this function at all. I'll need to change the page, of course, but I won't need to change the page that uses this function or any other page that uses this function. And that is a great thing. So that's a good characteristic of a good function. Does one thing, is not tied to the web page. The only communication with the outside world that the function has is through the arguments and the return value. So let's look at the chart more closely, and let's see how this chart works. All right, we have this include file up here, so we put the calculations here. We have our HTML to set up the table. We then have our PHP that creates a loop. Now remember, there's two ways that you can integrate your PHP with HTML. You can either use this tag to designate when you're in PHP and when you're in HTML, or you can create just a single block of PHP code. In this case, it seemed easier for me to go in and out of the PHP mode. So the start of my loop is in PHP mode. The end of the loop is in PHP mode. Therefore, this block of code is going to get called over and over again by this for loop. All right. So this HTML block is going to get called over and over and over again as a result of this loop. That's a little confusing, that you can actually start a for loop in one HTML declaration, or I'm sorry, one PHP declaration, and end it in another. That's why writing your code neatly and indenting is so critical. That's why keeping your code to small pieces and writing functions is critical too. Could you imagine how confusing this would be if, let's pretend there was all this code here. If the start of it was here and you had to scroll down there to see the end of it, that would be very, very, very confusing. So if you ever have a case where you have too much code in a for loop or an if statement or anything like that, consider breaking it down into functions. So now let's look at this loop. This says for the age, for the variable age, remember variables start with a $sign, equals 20. Repeat this as long as age is less than or equal to 80. Age equals age plus 5. So what will the values of age be in this example? They'll be 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80. The last time through the loop, it'll get incremented to 85. That is no longer less than or equal to 80, and therefore age will drop out of the loop. All right, because the age is too high. Well, okay, so we have this block of code that's going to get executed where the desired age is in a variable called $age. What do? Well, we create a new table row. And again, we can look at the HTML that gets output. We create a new table row that contains 3 TDs. The first one simply displays the age. So the first one simply displays 20, 25, 30, 35, all the way up through 80. The second TD contains, we calculate the maximum, we calculate the minimum. Actually, I said that opposite. We calculate the minimum, we calculate the maximum, and then we output it. So I say val1 equals calculate minimum exercise rate, and we pass in the age. So that means that the value of this variable gets put as the value of the argument, and this function gets calculated with that value, and the result is returned. The result is returned and put in this variable $val. We do the same thing, except we calculate the maximum exercise rate. That'll call this function. We then print value 1 dash value 2 BPM. Remember how these magic quotes work. If there is a $sign preceding something, it assumes it's the value of a variable. So this is going to automatically put the value of the variable here and the value of this variable here. Finally, we create a second TD and we print the result of calculate max heart rate, and we pass the age in. What if we had a function that returned the range, that returned this? Couldn't we have a single function that did that? We could, but if we did, we'd still want to have calculate maximum exercise rate and calculate minimum exercise rate, because we don't always want to see both of them. Sometimes we only want to see the maximum. Sometimes we may only want to see the minimum. By having the function return the maximum and minimum, the program that calls the function can format it any way it wants to. We could, for example, make a graph that showed this, okay? Not even show the numbers, but we could find a graphing library in PHP. I'm sure there is one, all right? Where instead of showing the numbers for the max and the numbers for the minimum, we would format a graph and show it that way. So remember, the function just does its job. If its job is to calculate the minimum exercise heart rate, that's what it does. It does not format it and display it. All right, that's the job of whoever calls the function, is to take the result and format it however it's supposed to be. So there's two things at play here. There's the program that calls the function, and there's the function itself. Each has its own responsibilities. The program that calls the function is responsible for finding the data that the function needs and supplying it by calling the function with those arguments. The function, or the page that calls the function, is also responsible for doing something with the output. All right, doing something with the output. Now, we might find at some point that this string we want to display on a bunch of different pages. Well, yeah, maybe then we add a new function to the include file to format this string, and maybe have display range string as a function. So this can evolve. as you find where you want to do the same thing in more than one place. Does it matter where the include file is? Let's find out. I have it at the top. What happens if I put it in the bottom? Boom, doesn't work. All right. Why doesn't it work? It doesn't work because PHP is a one-pass processor. What does that mean? It means it processes your page from the start to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. In other words, if at this point we want to call this function, that function better be defined up above where we call it. Therefore, it's best to probably put it at the very top of the page. That way, anyone who wants to call it, that function's already been defined. Now, what if we get an error? I get the name of the function wrong. And remember, it's case sensitive. Occasionally, you get a file that is cached. I'm going to go and clear history for this. So everything related to Planet Zellers, I'm deleting. Okay, why am I not getting an error?
Maybe try holding shift and then click push button. I know that.
Yeah. Shift. Am I editing the wrong file? Yeah. I'm editing the file that I downloaded, not the file in the web server. Well, those are good. That's good information to have anyhow. Browsers cache web pages. And in other words, they keep a copy of a local copy of a web page, which means that it's possible that a change that you make won't immediately be seen. Okay, now I'm editing the right one. It's editing the right one. For chart. I don't know. Let's make a bigger mistake. Just put some garbage in here. Ah, there we go. I don't know why it didn't give me an error before. Anyhow, this page is not working. Wow, isn't that nice? Not very descriptive error. All right. Now, if you're in production mode, you do not want to show error messages to the general public. There's a potential that error messages that you give could be used as information by hackers. There's a possibility of that. Therefore, if you're in production mode, maybe an error message like this is okay to show the user. For us, though, We want to see more detailed error messages. And that information is contained in what's called the PHP ini file. And let me look through this to find how it's processing the errors. And to change that. Okay. Error reporting equals all is going to display these errors. But display errors is set to off. We want that when we're in development mode. And it explains exactly what I said there. Error output is very useful during development, but it could be very dangerous in a production environment. So if I'm in development mode, I'm going to want to change this to on. So find your PHP ini file and change this display errors to on. And it is going to make me save it elsewhere. No. Yeah, it might. You'll put it in code. And there's about 1 million configuration settings in here. I counted them. Okay. So now, gives me a much more descriptive error message. Well, it gives me a little bit more descriptive of an error message. Parse error, syntax error, expected $val1 in blah, 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 and line 35. Well, that doesn't give me an exact error. But kind of tells me where the problem is. It sees val1 and it doesn't know what to do with that. Why doesn't it know what to do with val1? Because there's garbage in front of it. So it's not going to give you an exact error number, exact number of the page, all right, or the problematic thing, but it'll give you a number around where the problem is. And that usually is good enough where you can hopefully figure out what the error is. But I would suggest everyone should turn their display errors on, because that'll save you a lot of grief. I mean, I understand why they I don't know what it's doing with that. I understand why they do it, but it's a little frustrating that you have to turn that on. But because I will always forget to do it. Sometimes I will forget to tell students to do it, and it causes a little bit of disruption. Okay. Last thing to cover in this example, we will not cover today, but I will give a preview of it. Oh, one thing notice, by the way, is I called my homepage index.php. Your web server looks for certain file names, and index.html, index.php are two of them. This calculator has a form and has a check range PHP. And that uses a function, I think I closed out of it, a function in the heart inc file. So I'm going to make this example available. And you can take a look at that to sort of preview it, but we will cover that next time in class. And maybe we'll play around with it. Maybe we'll make another page that does something else similar. All right. And we'll go from there. All right. Are there any questions? All right. We will probably be meeting in this room all the time, by the way, because 105 is messed up. That's the technical term for it. All right. We'll see you next week.